One in a million to one villain. Too hot to be in the kitchen, I'll end up melting the ceiling.
What's going on, Hobby Lobby? It's your boy Javier Javier with the Javier Javier Show. Make sure you say it twice. I'm back with Robert Stanley from the Right to Season podcast. What's up?
Hey, buddy.
All good?
Yeah, doing really well. I taught my son how to chop wood this morning, and I ended up chopping a bunch of wood while he watched instead of what was supposed to happen. He'd been messing up in school, so his punishment was to chop wood. So I had to show him how, but then I ended up doing all the work, so now I'm sore.
Well, I see who's raising who.
Yeah, parenting method did not work.
So we got in a conversation about being a nihilist, and you kind of had some questions about nihilism when it came to my nihilism. So I thought it'd be great for us to have a conversation and sit down and, kind of go through it a little bit. It'd be something that the listeners might be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, I would think we probably both agree. I think there's one more step after nihilism. If we mean it the same way, do you mind just saying what you mean by that? Because I'm guessing it's more than just the Jordan Peterson version of. You're clearly not lazy. You are always busy posting stuff. You post like 3 times as much as I do.
I know, man. Hey, yeah, you must have it really sweet. You too busy chopping wood over there.
Yeah, I'm chopping wood instead of working on the podcast.
Yeah. So, what I mean when I say I'm a nihilist, my definition would be simply is I don't believe the universe has any purpose or meaning behind it. There, an overarching theme of it all. There is no purpose, to the universe or existence in its entirety.
That's it. Pretty much.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I would agree. I think Camus came along. Well, Kierkegaard comes along with absurdism initially, but his whole thing was something that we would both agree as atheists. It's just absurd to believe in a God. And then Albert Camus comes along and says, well, let's take this absurdism a step further. Of course, there's no God. There's no nothing. Kind of the point that you were making. And while addressing nihilism, his whole argument was that that's what's beautiful about life. You just need to take it a step further and accept that everything is a bit absurd. It's not that life, I won't say it that way. It's not that reality is absurd. Reality is just reality, right? And it's not that we're absurd for trying to live it with meaning and purpose, because that's just how we are. But he said the absurdity is these two things coming together, and that's kind of like the story of Sisyphus, where he had angered the gods. What did he do? Do you remember? I think it's always somebody fucked somebody. Always somebody having sex. But I think he was a king, and he wasn't supposed to do something. Yeah. They killed him, and then he figured out a way to escape Hades, I think, and he came back to life, basically. And they were really mad about that. So they condemned him to pushing a rock up a hill for eternity. And, once he would get it to the top of the mountain, probably better say mountain than hill, it would just roll back down to the bottom. And his life was completely absurd. It was completely worthless. And that's kind of what Camus uses as a reference to argue that the real happy moments of Sisyphus's life, it's hard to say Sisyphus's, or are those moments that he is pushing the rock up the hill. It sucks when he gets to the top and it rolls back down, and it sucks walking all the way back down. But he argues that those times that we're pushing our rock, we just have a purpose. We have meaning even to ourselves, and that's kind of beautiful in itself and a bit absurd.
Yeah, I would even take it a step further. I would take it to the extreme as to say, if there is a God, let's say there is a God, I would still believe that nihilism the is the proper way to frame reality. Because adding a God or taking away a God doesn't change the fact that that everything is purposeless in the end. Because if you exist to just serve that God, what's God's purpose? You know, it is like God would need a God to give him purpose. And even if you died and went to heaven and lived in eternity forever, what's the purpose of that? You say to serve God, and then I'll ask you, well, what's the purpose of that? You end up in an infinite regression of what's the purpose of what, you know? And eventually you're going to get to the point where there is no purpose. You know, this dude just exists and this is what he wanted, but there's no real purpose. It so happened that he wants it this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like the Bible addressed that immediately in Psalms, because that's what David said when he said, you know, why is it that the unjust can be so successful? You know, that things can go so well for bad people if you're here, you know, talking to God. And God didn't really have a response for him. And when Job asked God the same thing, why do I suffer? Why is there suffering? Why is everything... It really seems like nobody's piloting the ship here, God. And God just says, you know, becomes a tornado and says, "F you, Job. I'm God." You know. So I think that the Old Testament was aware of the conflict that you're presenting right away, and the way that they solved it was, you know, the Jewish people just blamed themselves, which isn't necessarily a bad way to go. You know, I think Albert would agree with that concept, at least as a lifestyle, where if you are constantly taking responsibility for things that go wrong in your life, you're more likely to be successful. You're more likely to be happy because of the result of having that attitude. We would all say that's, generally speaking, a good character trait to have. But with the concept of a deity, it's ridiculous, because he would be ultimately responsible. And then so they factor in free will, which I don't remember free will being in the Bible. Do you? I really, it wasn't even like it was a concept back then. Even in the New Testament, they just knew you do what you want, but they never even would have characterized will as either free or not. Even having the term free will assumes that there's a concept present of determinism, you know, of saying there is a will that isn't free.
Wow, I don't recall the word free will actually being in the Bible, but I'm not sure. And
not even conceptually, really. It's like you can at least say conceptually. My mind's failing me. What's it called whenever we all get pulled up to heaven?
the rapture.
Yeah, the rapture. I noticed that you were a big fan of the movies and the books from
Yeah, Left Behind.
Left Behind. Yeah, that's funny, man. I saw the Nick Cage one. So weird seeing him in a Left Behind movie. But anyway, at least the concept of the rapture is present, even though the word's not there. But the concept of free will, I think, isn't really there either, because they're not even smart enough at that time period. We didn't even have that kind of philosophical level going on. They were still dealing with theory of forms and virtue ethics.
I think it's heavily implied, though, because the whole kind of overarching theme of the Bible is that God created man and woman for a specific, you know, purpose to have fellowship with, and somehow men and women decided to go their own way. They made a choice to do something against what God wanted them to do, and therefore it leads to everything else that follows. Yeah. So it's heavily implied that we have a will to choose other than what was intended for us.
Yeah. So free will, free won't. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's implied, but I don't think it's addressed in
direct terms.
Yeah, like you're. I always feel like you're really only going to do something if you're forced to do it, or if you want to do it. And we can say, well, we do things we don't want to all the time. You don't want to go to work Monday morning, but you do it anyway. Well, technically, you're still doing what you want. That's just a figure of speech. I don't want to do it, but I'm doing it. No, you want to do it. You want to pay them bills. You begrudgingly pay your taxes. You begrudgingly mow your lawn, but you want to do it.
I don't believe in free will at all. I don't think the universe, the laws of nature allows for a free will to actually exist. Everything is cause and effect. Every action has a reaction, and therefore it's just like a ripple effect. And you just stuck with what you stuck with, because if you were a different person in a different circumstance with a different mother and father, and even if you had the same experiences as a guy who had a different mother and father, y'all are going to experience it differently. It's going to impact you differently, and all of that's out of your control. Brain receives information the way it does, which you don't determine what kind of brain you have and how you filter information and what convinces you and what doesn't convince you. Therefore, you're just stuck in this endless cycle of it's like dominoes. Once the dominoes start falling, you're just along for the ride. We just have this illusion that we're somehow the one knocking over the dominoes when the dominoes started way before we was even in the picture. You know what I mean? So, but let's stick to nihilism. Do you think that the logical conclusion for anybody, especially an atheist, how is it possible for an atheist to not be a nihilist?
I think they misunderstand what you mean whenever you say it, because I think what they think you mean by nihilism is nothing matters even at level 1, where you're not saying that. You're saying nothing matters at level 30, and the big full scheme of things, it really doesn't matter, and it's just a failure to put these concepts at levels where the analogy of I tell you. While I was out chopping wood, I say, I hurt my son intentionally while we were chopping wood. I would immediately face some kind of social cost in our friendship, right? Because you would immediately think of me as a bad person, as you should. But then that's one level, and then we take it to a higher level and say, I intentionally hurt my son today. And you say, why? I said, well, he had a rotting tooth. I had to have it pulled when we went to the dentist. Okay, well, that's in some kind of utilitarian ethics system, makes perfect sense, but that's on a different level. Or I say, my son died in war. And you say, how did that happen? Like, well, I always encouraged him to go into the military. I thought it was a good career and a good way to serve your country. And you say, well, on that level, whether you agree with that or not, you can at least understand that that's on a totally different thing, where maybe he went and the lies about WMDs, and then he was one of the people that was just shooting brown people left and right, or you know what I mean? And Chelsea Manning caught him on tape. But either way, ultimately, it seems for a greater purpose. And we just keep taking this analogy into infinity, and at some point we know nothing really matters. It wouldn't matter if I hurt my son or not. It doesn't matter if you're a serial killer or not in the big picture. But I think
that me and you've been listening to some of the same people.
Sure, I would think so.
Yeah, and I would say that I really personally, I consider myself to be a nihilist through and through. I really don't think everything on a local level matters either. I don't think, whether me and my wife love each other, I don't think that has a purpose. I don't think there's a purpose to that either. I don't think there's a purpose. Even on level 1, I don't think there's a purpose. I mean, if the universe is purposeless, then it follows. It follows all the way down the whole rabbit hole.
I don't believe you.
All the way down the ladder. I really do.
Not saying you're a liar. I don't believe the words that are coming out of your mouth right now. Of course you think there's value in whether you give somebody a sandwich or not.
Let's make sure we get our terms right. Is there value? Do I value something? That's different than whether I believe it has purpose. For example, I could prefer that me and my wife love each other. I could value the love that my wife gives me. But is there a purpose to her loving me? Of course not. Is there a purpose to me loving her back? Of course not. Then you would have to give me what is the purpose. You could say, well, nature wants you and a woman to get together and make a baby, but whether or not we make a baby, it still doesn't matter because one day we're all going to die. What you did and what you didn't do is not going to matter. And I see it like this. I'm here. I might as well enjoy myself. I might as well, push for the things I care about right now. But I don't think it's purposeful. I just think I have values, things that I value, and those are the things that I prefer. And that's the way for all of us. Some people just don't like to actually admit it.
I feel like it's a semantic disagreement that we're having with the word purpose, where obviously we would agree things happen for a reason, but not necessarily for a purpose in the same way like a religious person might. There's no purpose to life kind of thing, but we want to live life with a purpose, right? But it's just using the word in two different ways. So yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, in that sense, I would agree. But that's not what I meant by the reason people misunderstand your nihilism is because they're failing to understand levels. I wasn't saying that level 1 implies purpose.
Yeah.
In the way you mean purpose. I was saying level 1 is things that you care about and you put meaning in them and like I said, value. And obviously as you continue on the going higher up in this number, those values start going away.
Yeah. For example, if somebody asks me, hey man, what are you doing for when the universe ends? Why would I care? You know what I'm saying? Because now you're so far out on that level. It's yeah. So on local level, when you get down to the nitty gritty on the local level, then you start to realize, okay, well, I care what happens now. I care about me and my wife's relationship. I care about these things. I find value, and some would say purpose in what I'm doing. You can apply purposes to certain things. For example, if I decide that I'm going to vote one way or the other, I may have a purpose on which way that I'm voting. My purpose to vote for this person is because I want them to do X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean?
Right.
On a philosophical level, I can't get my purpose at all on any level.
I think Camus would push back on you and say, since you're staying at this level of nihilism, what is your goal? What are you doing it for? Because I would think the natural step forward is absurdism at that point. Is to once you accept that there is no meaning to life and that suicide is probably the most rational conclusion.
Not exactly. Because if there is no purpose, there is no any of that, then you would only assume that this is your only opportunity to experience anything. Why would you blow that?
Because the existential angst of recognizing there is no reason, or I'm not reason, by recognizing that there is no ultimate meaning, and also recognizing that you have a need to find it, leads us to what Camus argued, one of two forms of suicide. Most everybody takes the first one, and that's some kind of religious thing, that you say your purpose or your hope or your love and your faith and all that comes from without rather than from within. And that my culture means a lot to me. God bless America. I love Jesus and all that kind of thing. That's what he would call philosophical suicide. You're finding a way to deal with the absurd nature of reality and this existential angst by filling that gap with something else. And he said that's totally rational because you have to deal with that problem. It's not a happy feeling. I mean, you have to admit, it's not necessarily like nihilism is a little depressing, isn't it?
No, I
Not
find
at
it.
all?
I find it freeing. For one, I wouldn't want to be stuck in an endless loop of purpose. I wouldn't want to be always existing for the sake of some purpose, especially if it's out of my control. So to me, that would be depressing. That just imagine being created for somebody else's purpose, and no matter what you do, that person's purpose will always trump what you want. That to me is depressing. The second thing I would say is once you realize that, hey, I have a rare opportunity here, why wouldn't I, you know, taste things? Why wouldn't I, experience certain things? Why not? I mean, why not? Whether you die today or you die when you're 110, you're still gonna die. But in between that time, why not, enjoy yourself? Why not, experience what it's like to exist?
I can see that as rhetoric, but I see more in you than that. Like, you actually care about things that aren't just hedonistic in nature, things that don't necessarily make you happier or sadder. You have moral obligation, you have ethical contingencies, you have political opinions, you things that really, like, you care if as a libertarian, you care if someone else's nap is violated, even if they have nothing to do with you, I would assume, right?
Yes.
That doesn't fit into your
No,
hedonistic worldview.
It does, because I'm very good at being a human, for one.
Mm-hmm.
We're just humans, and humans by nature, they value things, they care about things, even irrational things. That's just what humans do. For example, I see humans as ants. Ants work in a colony, right? And their whole situation is set up to where they serve the queen because they want to keep the reproduction going, and they have a whole order to things, right? Humans think they're more important than ants. Humans think that they are special. They're not special because what? We can read, we can write, we can speak languages, we can build skyscrapers, we can go to the moon. How do we know that that's just not what humans do? What if it's just built into human nature just as much as ants serving the queen? It's just different, so we somehow think it's special. You know what I mean? So like an alien force could be hovering over the planet Earth right now, looking at us and was like, look at humans. They just doing what humans do. Just like we would look at ants saying, ants just do what ants do. We're not special, but I'm very good at being a human because I'm doing human things. Humans care about politics. Humans, argue and debate. Humans value things. That just comes with the territory. It's as natural to me as it is to ants when they serve the queen.
But you apply a moral significance to these concepts. You're not just, like, the way that you describe just being human makes you care about, for the nap being violated, for example. I don't think you describe it in the way that you say, I either like vanilla or chocolate ice cream.
That way.
I don't think it is. You're applying some kind of moral value to this, which means you care about it, which means it's not just all for your pleasure. You're doing some things against your own pleasure. It's not fun for you all the time to do a podcast that's about reason and thought and free speech. But you choose to do that, where you could probably have fun doing a podcast on, whatever, something else that's not as frustrating, perhaps.
But I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm doing what you're doing at the same time. I'm you and you're me. We just so happen to have different experiences and different families. But if you were me, you wouldn't know it because you're so busy being me. Does it make sense? I
No.
see human.
Explain that.
So, for example, if you were born me and I was born you, how would you know it? How would you know the difference? You wouldn't
there
know.
wouldn't, yeah, there wouldn't be a difference. It'd be you.
Exactly. You
Right.
would just think, yeah, you would just think you've always been me, and that's just the way. That's just who you are. And all humans are that way. We're all just circumstantial beings who have certain DNA, certain experiences that groomed us to be what we consider to be me or you. And the way I see it is it comes with the territory. I don't see it as you say that I care or I have morals. I don't have morals. I have preferences. A preference. My preferences are based on my DNA, my experiences, and everything that has happened up to this point to shape me to who I am. So if anything, is all out of my control. So it's not necessarily morals. It's just I've become the type of person who would prefer these things over those things. Because if that was the case, if rationality ruled everything, we would all come to the same conclusions on every single subject, but we don't. So morals are subjective. They're all based on preference. Even the things that we objectively know or claim to know, we can't even really prove. For example, we could be in a simulation. The laws of nature could be built within the simulation for us to believe it's objective. We don't know that. So could you ever be 100% certain about anything?
Okay, so I disagree with you. I agree that our morals are subjective, but I think there was an implication there that objective morality doesn't exist, and I think it can still exist even in an atheist nihilistic sense.
No, not at all.
Perhaps not at, once again, referencing levels, not at level 30, right? At level 30, none of this shit matters. And not really at level 1 either. But somewhere in between, I think it certainly exists. And I would say it does in the sense of before we knew slavery was wrong, it was still wrong to enslave someone. Now, you could say, well, that's just your subjective opinion about that concept, Robert. But I would come back and say, whether I believe it or not, we know it would still be wrong. Because
how do you
what's
know?
best for human flourishing is still the same, whether there's humans or not.
Why is human flourishing your standard?
Because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about morality. If not,
No.
I don't know what morality is.
Morality is created, it's made up, it's subjective. For example, there are plenty of religions, for the Mayans or the Aztecs, for example, who did child sacrifices or whatever. To them, that wasn't in human flourishing sake, but to them, it was about morals. To them, they had a moral duty to the gods to perform it. You wouldn't say that was moral, but they would.
Are you going to make the claim that human sacrifice is wrong for me, but not for a Mayan 2,000 years ago?
No, what I'm saying is your morals are based on your preference, and the Mayans' preference was totally different than yours. So in their eyes, their morals are totally different than yours. And if you got thrown back in that time, I guarantee you real quick, you will find out that most people think you're immoral.
Sure, but they'd be wrong.
You couldn't prove it.
No.
Why can't you prove it? If it's true for all time, at all moments in life and existence, you should be able to use your logic to prove it to be wrong in any circumstance at any given time throughout history. But you can't, because it's subjective. It's purely subjective.
No, there's things that you can know that you can't prove.
For example?
If I told you that, let's say you don't speak English, and I told you that I have a priori knowledge that a bachelor is unmarried. I can't prove it to you, but I know that to be true.
1 in a million to one villain. Too hot to be in the kitchen, I'll end up melting the ceiling.